Hola a todo el mundo, estamos aquí con Mark Verbos de Verbos Electronics, aprovechando que es el Modular Day. Y bueno, qué mejor ocasión que, pues, aprovechar para hacerle algunas preguntas que seguramente, bueno, nosotros teníamos ganas de hacerle. Hello Mark, welcome. First time in Spain
Hello.
as Verbos Electronics.
That's true.
Not as Verbos.
Yeah.
Okay, because you have been an artist for something like 20 years maybe, and you started doing techno maybe. And how did you finally decide to launch your modular company?
I started out a long time ago making my music as a teenager, and was always interested in synthesizers, analog synthesizers.
Sound design.
Yeah, and well, in those days, the old ones that I was finding used and oftentimes repairing them because they were in quite bad condition. So at the same time that I was learning about making music of my own, I was also learning about electronics and started with building my own DIY projects just for myself and also doing the repairs. And these two things were happening the whole time, side by side. But as I got a little bit older and things changed a little bit in music, I found that more of my time was dedicated to the synthesizers than to the music making. So I never stopped one or the other, but around the time that the industry for new synthesizers was getting much bigger, I decided to take that knowledge that I had from making my own and from repairing and all of that, and apply it to a new synthesizer of my design that was in some ways influenced by the so-called West Coast philosophy of old synthesizers, but also extended that to being interface-driven designs that I, as a user, would want to have. So, as someone making electronic music, I know how I would like things to work, and so I try to bring that into what I'm designing with these modules. That it can be exactly the instrument that I always wanted.
Okay, it's a good point about having on mind that you develop a product in some way based on your needs as an artist, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah, and thinking about it will help other artists to make making music better.
It's a difficult thing to understand why so many of the people who are designing electronic instruments don't even make music of their own. They're just engineers. So they could be applying this knowledge to a kitchen appliance, like making a toaster, but instead they're making a musical instrument. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the person who's dreaming up the instrument to also be someone who wants to use it, because when I'm coming up with a new idea, I already know how I want it to work and how I would use it, so that helps me to make it more musical.
You started something like 5 years ago, if I'm not wrong?
4 years ago.
4 years ago, and it's more or less the same time that this Eurorack thing has become more popular. What's behind that? Why there is this new interest into modular synth? What do you think about?
Well, of course, for me, I've been using modular synths for 25 years, but the fact that there are new ones available is a twist, because when I started out, the only option for using this type of machine would be to find an old one. And they were very rare, because in the original olden days, the modular synths were very expensive, so only universities or very successful professional electronic musicians would have them. So they wouldn't really come up on the used market very often. So it was an elitist community. Only very lucky people would have access to these old machines. And also in those days, if you had like a Moog modular, everything in that system would have to be from Moog, because each different modular was a completely separate world that they lived in, and they didn't really work together. So when Doppler started making the A100, which really became Eurorack, it was the first time where a fully modular synthesizer was available in a very small and very affordable fashion. And then as some other brands started to use the same format, it was the first time where a bedroom user could have a system that was a mix of all different brands. And I think that was the beginning of inviting a lot of new people into the community, because it wasn't, it was for an open group. Anyone could come in and manufacture, and anyone could come in and use the products, and it wasn't all controlled by one manufacturer or by one group of people. So as 2013 came around, when I was designing and preparing to launch my brand, there were maybe 70 manufacturers who were in varying sizes, some quite big, but often just like one guy in a bedroom, making one product.
One company.
But now, 4 years later, there are almost 150 manufacturers making this format. So it seemed like a real revolution, where all of the interest from the modular synthesizer world was all going to this community. And even though Eurorack has some limitations that make it not the perfect format, it is
but it works.
Exactly, and it's a format that invites a lot more new people to come into it.
And also there is also the other side, like the do-it-yourself culture, that is also very quite popular on the Eurorack community, which it's very relevant. Maybe we have to make some documentary about all these side effects about modular.
Well, that's also a change that happened since those days, because when I was involved with do-it-yourself synthesizers in the beginning of the 90s, it was very difficult to find information, and so it was a bit like a cult or a secret society to find any information and to find out how to make something yourself. For instance, how to make a circuit board, or how to what also the information about what was done in the commercial synthesizers. So so much of the process of learning about electronics as they relate to music is knowing what happened in existing products, like learning about what other people did. Now, because of the internet and the communities that have formed around this, now there's a lot of information, and there are new brands making kits, and there are clubs of people discussing and giving each other information. So
like tomorrow, the modular day.
Exactly. So all of this is the result of the new world that we live in, where now with the internet and communication like it is, anything is possible, and everyone can get into these things and get that information in a way that you couldn't 20 years ago.
And when you started Verbos, what was your first module or modules to be on the street?
We were really proud that I was developing I wanted to start the company not with one module and go to a trade show and have to show one module that didn't have anything to connect to or to connect with. I didn't want to have somebody else's setup with just one of mine. I wanted to have a complete instrument, so I designed 5 modules from the start in secret, and then when we were ready to announce that we had a brand, we already had 5 modules ready and shipping. So those were the complex oscillator, the voltage multi-stage, the harmonic oscillator, the amplitude and tone controller, and also the dual 4-pole, which isn't in this system. But then after that, we released 2 modules a year or something until this year when we moved from New York City to Berlin. So we haven't released a new product this year because we've been dealing with this transition. But some new things are coming.
Good to hear. Your models are very well appreciated by artists. What do you think they appreciate your models? The quality of the sound, the quality of construction, everything?
All of those things are important, but for me, the main focus is about the interface and about the feeling that you get while using it. So I think that the look and the design and those things are a part of that, but mostly it's about logical flow, that every every parameter that can be adjusted is one control per function. Nothing hidden behind menus.
Okay.
Nothing where you have to hold a button while you do something else. No screens. All.
What you see, what you get.
And that there's a logical signal flow that the signal inside of the module seems to flow from the bottom to the top, and then when the whole system is together, the whole system seems to flow from the controllers in the front to the mixers and VCAs in the back, so that it moves from here to there, and also that there's a nice indication of what's happening. Where we use a lot of sliders and LEDs, so that you always can know what's happening.
Where are you?
Yeah.
At every moment.
And it's a bit intuitive that the bigger controls are the more important ones, and that something like in a harmonic oscillator where there's a mix of a bunch of signals, we have it in sliders, so you can see a graphic representation of what's happening. And
well, let's talk about the harmonic oscillator, because it's one of my favorite ones. How did you get the inspiration for developing that kind of addictive oscillator?
Well, my primary interest in the older synthesizers and my specialty for doing repairs was with the vintage Buchla instruments. And Buchla made what he called a harmonic generator, which was an oscillator that had multiple harmonic outputs back in the 100 series.
What price?
Well, everything in those days was expensive, but also the Buchla 100, well, all of the Buchla instruments were very, very rare. So in certain cases, he more or less only made a prototype and never really went into production. So there are some modules, I don't know this one in particular what the numbers were, but some of the modules he only made 5 or something like this. So even if you had the money, you might never see one. So the problem with it, I'd actually done some servicing on that module before, so I knew a lot about what was in it. But the problem was, again, with the interface, that the way it was presented was just a largely blank panel with just outputs from each of the harmonics. And in order to make a patch with that, you'd have to have mixers and VCAs and then a lot of modules just to get to the basic blending of these harmonics together in order to be creative, because you just had a lot of outputs. And what you find even in this case, what you find is if you just have, do we have a way that we can hear it? If you have just all of the outputs just mixed, you don't get such an interesting sound. It sounds a bit like an organ, maybe. It's when you move the mix around in some way that it becomes interesting. So I had the idea that doing something like that, but bringing it together with a mixer section that allowed dynamic blending between the harmonics from voltages and from panel controls, that this would be a way to really take it from being a lot of outputs to being more of an additive synthesis engine where everything can work together. Right, because if you can send in an envelope signal to change the blend, then you can start to make things that weren't possible with a simple subtractive synthesizer, and also continue to bring in different variations so that a totally different way of making patches comes up, because all of the ideas about how a conventional idea about how you should have an oscillator followed by a filter followed by a VCA and filter away, take a saw or a square wave and filter away harmonics, all of that disappears. Sure, it's additive synthesis like you said, but it's not the additive synthesis that you know from computer software or
500 partials.
Exactly, it's a very simple format,
simple
but
to understand and to manage, and with nice results.
Exactly,
in a quick way.
where you can reach out and touch something and imagine ways of using it that are intuitive or that work for making music, and the results are very different than what would come from really anything else.
Even compared from the original Buchla.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be possible to do even the simplest things like selecting between which harmonic is active just from one voltage. That's not possible, because even if you patched all those outputs into mixers and VCAs, you wouldn't have available some way to select one of the VCAs. So even though it's a simple closed system, it provides possibilities that were never there before. And even in something so contained, it always surprises me even what comes from it. People all find different ways to use it in different ways than I ever thought of. So it's a really inspiring piece that lets everybody start to explore new ideas. That sometimes if someone is using the modular for a long time, they start to feel stuck, like they're doing the same patch over and over again. And what I really like about that is that it totally gets rid of that and starts with a new blank canvas to start painting on.
That's a good point. And what about the last product from you, the Bark filter?
So the Bark filter is a filter bank with fixed bandpass filters that are all spaced on what's called the Bark scale, which is a scale based on the response of human hearing. So rather than putting the filter, in most fixed filter banks, the spacing or equalizers, the spacing is on octaves, which means that they're spaced equally across the spectrum, but they tend to favor one note or one scale throughout the range. So, so it's already well known among filter bank builders that it's nice to use something a little bit unrelated to musical intervals to space out the filters. And then the second thing, well, that means that this one places much more emphasis in the area where human hearing is the most sensitive, so the mid-range, upper mid-range, where they're closer together, and then as they go out, the spacing is bigger. But also, these filters are very steep. They're 3 stages deep, so 36 dB per octave slopes, and and that allows pretty dramatic separation between sections, and then coupled together with all of the bands have individual outputs, and then they have individual envelope followers on those outputs, and a voltage-controlled mixer, which is similar to the voltage-controlled mixer in the harmonic oscillator, that allows dynamic blending of these fixed frequency filters, which allows the fixed filter bank to start to resemble a filter that's moving. So it can, of course, be used like an equalizer, just to make a graphic representation of a spectral profile, which is nice for making imitations of resonant bodies or something like that. But it can also be used from these controls and treat filters that are staying at the same frequency, but just by mixing them together, give the impression that we're actually moving a filter around. And an extra fun feature of this is that with the display of the level coming out of each output and an indication of the level of the mixer, we get an idea where the content of the signal is and what part we're hearing out of that. And for the first time, really, with a synthesizer module, we have an understanding then of, for instance, if this wave is only down here, that's why we don't hear anything when we're only listening up here. So it is a nice interface that gives feedback to the user about where the action of their sound is. And by having all of these functions here, these envelope follower outputs on the bands and CV inputs on the bands, with these switches we're able to make the odd bands control the even bands, or the other way around, to act as a sort of a simple vocoder even. And it's not enough bands and it's not enough resolution to make really clean vocoding sounds, but it can be quite interesting for applying a spectral profile, exactly, like applying a spectral image from one thing onto another, put drums into one side and a pad sound in the other, and get something interesting out of it. So it's also a nice opportunity to see how this just functional set of tools, how different people use it, because
you have one idea behind the concept, but maybe the users, as usual, will find new ways to make things with that.
Right, and I'm surprised every time that I see someone else working with it, that they do things I never imagined, and maybe I would do things that they had never imagined. So it's quite inspiring.
Definitely. Okay, Mark, thank you so much. So now I think it's time for making some noise.
Okay.
So it's up to you to do some jamming with that. How do you think now modulars are helping people doing more interesting lives, specifically for electronic music or even techno music? How do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of artists who were doing all of their music in a computer, and probably pretty successfully doing their music all in a computer, started to think that it might be interesting to take a different path and experiment with having something in front of them that they're interacting with. And a lot of people say that they're spending so much time on a computer that it's nice to have something away from the computer that they can work together with and try to get to their music, or to make music.
And more than is not they are searching, they are finding.
Right. Well, I think that it's more interactive. Maybe that means that it's much harder to ever finish anything, but it's about process.
It's a risk.
Yeah, it's about the feeling of using something that is in front of you and is physical, has a presence, is in the space with you, rather than always something that's like virtual. I don't personally believe that it's always about sound quality. I think that you can get great sounds from software, but
Definitely.
It's just a different experience
The
to work
approach.
together. Exactly. So, and it's quite interesting that although I have been using these types of instruments for a long time, it wasn't so common for people making techno music to use these until recently. But I think that it's nice when you talk about live performances. I think we have almost like a new category, which is the idea of making music using the synthesizer that is totally in this moment and only happens this one time. It's experimental.
Don't expect to play hits, because it's
Exactly.
not possible to play hits.
But we are also finding that in the synthesizer community now, more of the people who were just synthesizer people are now doing performances and making their own music. So it's these two camps coming together in the middle, and a new category developing, which is the performances using live synthesizers. And with this system, I've played in Berghain and in Tresor and these like techno clubs. So I think that now that's becoming a much more common thing.
Yeah, in a way, it's not only about the sound; it's about the way you sequence. Maybe it's not about the sound that can be random in some way, but the sequence that you get results that will never happen anymore. So that's, for me, it's exciting to play with something that is not going to sound the same time the next time we will play in a different club. So
I agree. I think that that it then makes this somehow connected with this improvisation and this experimentation. We really make this moment special because we could never repeat it. So,
and also it helps you to have some kind of conversation with the public, because you can change very quickly the way the music sounds depending on how the public reacts. So it's more close to what a DJ does than what a musician does, that just play his songs or her songs, and that's all. I think I found the modular something that helped artists to be more close to how the DJ plays his rules than a regular musician,
Yeah, that's true. But if you spend the time
a DJ never plays the same session twice.
True, but he only has, or she only has, what's in the collection as available. Mm-hmm. Whereas if with this type of machine, if you really get to know it well, then you could come up with an
That's not
infinite
easy, but
number of
that's the ultimate.
possibilities.
Yeah,
you
definitely.
you could always change what you're doing, and when the day comes that you don't like what you're doing anymore, you're bored because you've done the same thing so many times,
Exactly.
you can decide to start trying a different way of doing it. And it's a bit more difficult to learn in the beginning.
But the results are more funny.
I think so, yeah.
So, okay, Mark, it's up to you to do
Okay.
some
So I'll do some patching around and see what I can come up with, and then.
The funny thing is just having a conversation, no? It's patching when speaking, yeah.
We did at the Super booth in Berlin. We did some what they called Gesprächskonzerte, which are like talking concerts. But what I thought was interesting was giving a presentation about the machine and what it does, but also patching while talking and describing what the patching was. And this is also somewhere between a performance and a presentation.
Nice thing. SFR.
If I have too many FM sources, then I can't even tell what's modulating anymore. That's just FMing the spectral tilt.
Okay. Pretty cool. And when you're performing live, you only get your case with these modules, and or you have some other reading boxes, bit boxes, or
TR-909.
a classical.
Yeah, exactly.
And how you manage to send clock from the 909? The rim shot?
Yeah, the rim shot sends out a trigger, and then I'll step the advance on the voltage multi-stage to move the sequencer along, which is an opportunity to program the rhythm into the 909 to make the sequence play not just 16th notes, or program just 16th notes in the machine and program.
You use external effects, processing the modular,
Yeah,
delays.
in this case I have a small processor just for reverb and delays, but we don't yet have the solution to have the effects internally, but perhaps that will come soon, and then we can eliminate that too. But you know, now I'm only using this size case, so it could be really easy to run out of space with that. So then part of the creative process is how to work with what is available. If I don't go larger, then I have to be really conservative about how much I'm doing with this, so that I can get the most different things at one time. And this could be also that while doing one sequence with this, then maybe also doing something with noise that or one of even something so simple as using the fluctuating randoms and the random sampling that are basically noise with voltage control of the spectrum, and using those with envelopes to make and also I'm using a small external mixer, so I can have 4 or 5 or 6 sources happening all at the same time.
Cool, so cool, Mark. So thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Welcome to Barcelona. Hope you enjoy these next days.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And see you soon. Take care of it.